They found the patrol car upside down at the bottom of a frozen ravine, its headlights still burning through the snow, like eyes refusing to close. Inside, a police officer was chained to the wheel, still breathing somehow. And beside that wreck, in the middle of the blizzard, stood a lone veteran and his K9, two souls who had already buried too many ghosts to turn away now. But that rescue was only the beginning. That night's discovery would unravel a chilling network of betrayal, human trafficking, and a brotherhood shattered by greed. Beyond the storm, mercy did not wait. Only a secret buried deep enough to silence anyone who found it. What happens next will make you cry and believe in miracles again. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support truly means the world to us. And tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. And may your night, wherever you are, be a little warmer after this story. The storm came without mercy, like a curtain tearing heaven from earth. By dusk, Montana's border valley had already disappeared beneath an avalanche of white. Wind shrieked across the plains, devouring every sound except the hollow groan of bending pines and the dull moan of snow sliding off barn roofs. Porch lights flickered one by one, then vanished entirely as power lines sagged under the ice. It was the kind of storm that erased the living from the land, the kind that made a man question whether he was still part of the world he stood in. Down the winding service road, a pair of headlights fought to stay visible, slicing through the darkness with weary determination. Behind the wheel sat Raymond Cole, 55 years old, face carved by decades of weather and war, eyes steady even as the snow blinded him. His hands, calloused, trembling only when the truck hit a patch of ice, gripped the wheel with the same resolve he once held a rifle. The radio on the dashboard crackled to life, the static so thick it sounded like rain falling on tin. Then a voice cut through. "Officer missing. Last known near mile 42. And then, nothing. No coordinates, no response. Only silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. Beside him, Max, his German Shepherd partner, sat tall despite the sway of the truck. 9 years old, his coat a deep sable brown with a streak of silver under the jaw, a scar marking his muzzle like a whisper of past battles. His chest rose and fell evenly, yet his eyes, amber and unblinking, scanned the storm as if it were a living enemy. The sound of the wind made his ears twitch, but he did not bark. Max had learned long ago that silence sometimes saved more lives than noise. Raymond adjusted the heater, though the air blowing through the vents was barely warm. The interior smelled of leather, oil, and wet fur, a strangely comforting scent of old loyalties. He spoke softly, not sure whether to himself or to Max. "We've seen worse, haven't we, boy?" But even as he said it, a part of him knew that wasn't true. There was something about this storm, its timing, its weight, that felt like a warning rather than weather. The miles dragged by. Snow swallowed the road markers, turning the world into one endless white corridor. Every so often, Raymond thought he saw movement, something dark and quick at the edge of the lights. But each time it vanished before his brain could name it. He tried to shake the feeling of being watched, but it stayed, gnawing at the back of his mind like an old ache that knew exactly where to hurt. Then it happened. The beam of the headlights caught something unnatural. Metal twisted outward, wooden posts splintered clean in half. The guardrail had been hit hard and bent toward the ravine below. Raymond's gut tightened. He slowed the truck until the wheels crunched to a stop beside the brake. For a long moment, he just listened. The wind, the hum of the idling engine, and, somewhere beneath that, the faint echo of water running under ice. He stepped out, and the cold hit him like a blade. The air was sharp enough to steal breath. He tugged his coat tighter, squinted against the blizzard's sting, and swept the flashlight beam over the edge. The snow swirled so thick that it took a few seconds before the light found what it was looking for, a glint of metal half buried in the ravine below. He steadied the beam. A patrol car, upside down, its wheels half embedded in ice. Max barked once. Short, urgent. He'd seen it too. Raymond looped the tow rope around a pine trunk, testing it twice before throwing the coil down the slope. His boots sank deep into the drift, the rope creaking as he began his descent. The wind tore at him, pulling at his jacket and scarf, but he moved with the cautious confidence of a man who'd spent his life walking into dangerous places. Max followed without command, muscles rippling under his coat, paws landing in the same prints Raymond left behind. By the time they reached the wreck, the air felt heavier, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. The car was a mess of bent steel and broken glass, its siren light flickering weakly under a film of frost. The door was jammed, windows fogged white from the inside. Raymond wiped a circle clear with his glove and froze. A man hung from the driver's seat, upside down, hands cuffed to the steering wheel. His uniform was torn, face swollen from the cold, a thin line of blood frozen along his temple. The badge on his chest still gleamed faintly through the frost. Officer Ryan Cooper. Raymond's breath caught. He broke the window with the rescue hammer, the sound muffled by snow. Shards glittered as they fell, mixing with the ice. Leaning in, he pressed 2 fingers against the man's neck. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, faintly, a pulse. Weak, fluttering, but real. "Hang in there," he whispered, though the wind stole the words. "You're not gone yet." Max pushed forward, wedging his body through the broken frame until he was half inside the car. His nose brushed against Ryan's chest, and then he did something Raymond had seen only once before. He lay down. Slowly, deliberately, Max curled his body against the officer's torso, pressing close, letting his body heat seep into the cold flesh. The gesture was instinctive, silent, and painfully human. Raymond worked quickly, unclipping the man's belt, freeing one wrist from the cuff with his pocket tool. His hands were stiff, but he forced them to move. "Come on, soldier," he muttered, though he knew Ryan wasn't one of his. "Don't quit on me now." The snow kept falling, thickening until even the sound of the wind felt distant. Time blurred. Minutes could have been hours. When he finally looked up, the edges of his vision pulsed from exhaustion. The flashlight flickered, the battery dying. He leaned back, drawing one long breath, and looked at the faint steam rising from Ryan's lips. Alive. Barely. For a heartbeat, the world was still. Only Max's low breathing and the faint groan of the mountain filled the air. Then a new sound cut through it, the slow crunch of tires on snow above them. Raymond looked up sharply toward the ridge. Through the haze, 2 pinpoints of white light blinked once, then held steady. Headlights. A vehicle had stopped right where the guardrail was broken. He squinted, hand instinctively moving to the rifle case strapped to his shoulder. The headlights didn't move. They just stayed there, idling in silence, the engine barely audible over the wind. And then, without warning, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the ravine. Max lifted his head, ears pricked, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Raymond's fingers tightened on the rope, eyes locked on the ridge above. He couldn't see who or what was up there. Only the faint echo of a door closing and the wind carrying something else with it. Footsteps. Slow. Crunching. Getting closer. The storm howled again, bending the trees until they groaned like old timbers, and for a moment it sounded like the world itself was trying to speak. Raymond's breath misted in the dark as he whispered to Max, "Stay with him." Then he turned toward the slope, toward the sound of whoever had come back to finish what the storm had started. The dawn came pale and heavy, not as light, but as surrender. The kind of morning that carried no warmth, only a quieter shade of cold. The storm had slowed to a breath, its rage spent, leaving behind a silence so deep that even the creak of Raymond's cabin felt like an intrusion. Inside, the air smelled of wet wool, pine smoke, and desperation. A single lantern swung from the ceiling beam, its glow trembling over the rough wood walls, catching on the frost still clinging to the window panes. Raymond Cole moved like a man at war with time. On the floor near the stove, Officer Ryan Cooper lay swaddled in wool blankets, his body trembling under layers that couldn't seem to hold in the heat. His skin had the gray pallor of stone, lips pale and cracked. Max lay pressed against him, head resting just beneath the officer's shoulder, eyes half closed but vigilant. The kind of quiet watch that had nothing to do with sleep. Each exhale from the dog rose in slow clouds that touched the man's cheek, melting frost that should never have been there. Raymond worked without speaking. He rubbed Ryan's arms with steady, rough palms, coaxing the blood back toward his heart. Between motions, he poured small spoonfuls of broth into the officer's mouth, thick, homemade, steaming faintly in the cold air. The cabin had become a battlefield, and every gesture was a form of resistance against the inevitable. In the rhythm of it, something inside Raymond broke loose. Memory, old and unwanted, slipping through the cracks of the present. Another winter. Another man, younger then, eyes wide and fading. A name he still couldn't say without tasting failure. The snow that night had been different, softer, almost kind. But death had been the same. He could still feel the weight of that soldier's head falling back in his hands. The silence afterward louder than any storm. Raymond blinked hard, forcing the past back where it belonged, or at least where it stayed quiet. The fire cracked, throwing a wave of light across the room. Ryan stirred. His eyelids fluttered, breath shallow, and when his eyes finally opened, they weren't the eyes of a man waking from sleep. They were eyes dragged back from something darker. He looked around, confused at first, then terrified, as if the shadows themselves had teeth. His lips parted, and what came out wasn't a plea, nor a name of gratitude, just one fractured word. Jack. Raymond froze mid-motion, the cup still hovering in his hand. The word meant nothing to him. But the way Ryan's pupils contracted, sharp like a cornered animal, told him everything he needed to know. That wasn't the fear of dying. It was the fear of being found. He didn't ask. Sometimes silence was the only mercy you could offer a man who'd already seen too much. Outside, the snow kept falling in lazy spirals, whispering against the window. Hours passed, and Ryan's breathing grew steadier, his face less ghostly under the wavering light. Raymond finally sat down beside the old desk where his tools were kept. Splintered wood, a rusted lamp, a stack of old army reports yellowed with age. He reached for Ryan's torn vest to hang it near the fire when something inside caught his eye. A small flash drive, dented, wet, but intact. He turned it over between his fingers. The casing was military grade, not the kind of thing a patrol cop would normally carry. Something about its weight felt wrong, heavy in a way that didn't come from metal. Raymond hesitated for a long time, then reached for the old laptop sitting on the desk, its casing scratched and edges patched with tape. When he pressed the power button, the screen flickered to life, humming weakly, and after a moment, so did the drive. The first image appeared grainy, a warehouse interior, the light cold and surgical. Metal tables, crates stacked to the ceiling, men in dark coats moving between them with a purpose too organized to be random. Then came the close-ups. Medical coolers labeled with serial numbers, surgical tools glinting under harsh light, and faces, not patients, not soldiers, but people sedated, restrained, and cataloged like inventory. It wasn't drugs, it wasn't weapons, it was human lives, traded like cargo. Raymond leaned closer, disbelief tightening in his chest. The cursor trembled under his hand as the footage shifted to a new angle. A man standing alone under a single bulb, his face hidden in the shadows, but his voice clear. No one leaves until the shipment clears the ridge. The clip cut off there, screen fading into black static. The laptop hummed. Raymond sat still, hand on the mouse, the faint reflection of his own face staring back at him. A man too old for shock, but not numb enough to ignore it. Behind him, Max gave a low growl, soft but deep, the kind that rumbled from somewhere protective. The dog's ears pricked, eyes locked on the cabin door. The firelight shimmered against his fur, and Raymond felt it too. The sudden shift in the wind, the unnatural stillness between gusts. He closed the laptop slowly, stood, and listened. At first, there was only the pop of the fire. Then, faint but distinct, a sound crawled through the snow-laden air. An engine. Not the restless roar of travel. The idle hum of patience. A vehicle somewhere beyond the tree line, running but unmoving, waiting. Raymond's pulse quickened. He crossed the cabin in silence, the boards beneath his boots groaning softly. Through the frost-blurred window, he saw nothing. Only the suggestion of light where there shouldn't be any. Max followed close, his tail stiff, breath fogging in short bursts. Raymond reached for the rifle mounted above the hearth. Walnut stock worn smooth, barrel oiled clean. He loaded a single round, slow and deliberate, the metallic click echoing through the room like a warning sent into the dark. He took position by the window, finger resting along the trigger guard, eyes narrowed toward the shadows beyond the trees. The storm outside had quieted, but the danger had not. The enemy wasn't the weather anymore. It was whoever had followed the storm to find what Raymond had pulled out of it. And somewhere out there, in the blur between dawn and snow, someone was still watching. The storm had left, but the world it abandoned felt hollow, like breath held too long. The pines stood heavy with ice, their branches bowed low under the weight of silence. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney in thin, uncertain spirals, vanishing into a sky the color of pewter. Inside, Raymond kept the fire alive with the steady rhythm of a soldier on watch. Ryan still slept, his face waxen, the faintest pulse flickering at his neck. Max lay by the door, ears twitching at sounds no human could hear, the kind that lived between echoes. When the knock came, it was too soft to be afraid, too human to be wind. Raymond opened the door, ready for the worst, and found something that neither his rifle nor his instincts could have prepared him for. A boy stood there, small, fragile-looking in the way glass looks before it shatters. His cheeks were red from the cold, His lashes clumped with ice, and his jacket hung too big for his frame. One arm ended just below the elbow, where a simple wooden prosthetic curved smooth like something carved by love rather than machine. On his other hand, he held a leash, and on the other end of it, the snow-dusted shadow of loyalty itself. Max. For a heartbeat, Raymond forgot how to breathe. Samuel, he whispered, the name a prayer and a warning in the same breath. The boy's green-gray eyes lifted toward him, steady, braver than any child's should be. Dad, he said softly, voice trembling more from what he'd seen than the cold. They were looking for a policeman. Raymond's world contracted into a single, sharp point of dread. He pulled Samuel inside and closed the door with the quiet care of a man defusing a bomb. The boy's skin was ice, his lips pale. He'd walked miles, from the rescue outpost near the ridge where the radio tower stood like a frozen sentinel. "How did you find us?" Raymond asked, voice low. Samuel glanced at Max, then back at him. "I followed him," he said simply. "I knew where he'd go." That answer cut through Raymond deeper than the wind ever could. There was no time to marvel, no space for the ache of pride or fear. He led Samuel to the stove, wrapped him in a blanket, and crouched so their eyes met. "Stay low," he murmured. "Don't make a sound." Then he turned toward the door again, the soldier in him already awake. Outside, the snow carried stories, if you knew how to listen. He stepped out, rifle slung but ready, boots sinking into the soft crust. The morning light had the stillness of the aftermath, but beneath it, the truth waited, half buried. Tire tracks looped through the clearing, wide treads from an off-road vehicle. Beside them, boot prints, heavy, deliberate, circling the cabin like wolves testing the fence. Whoever had come in the night hadn't left. Or if they had, it was only to return. He followed the prints to the tree line. The pines loomed overhead, dark against the snow, their roots clawing at the ground, like old bones. Each step whispered, each breath clouded. He could almost feel the eyes of the forest on him. Or perhaps it was memory again, rising like ghosts beneath the frost. When he returned to the cabin, the air inside had shifted. Ryan was awake. Barely. The officer's gaze wandered, confused, until it landed on Samuel, the boy half hidden behind the stove. For a second, something like peace crossed his face, then horror swallowed it. "You shouldn't have..." His voice cracked, the rest swallowed by weakness. Raymond raised a hand to quiet him. "Save your strength." But Ryan's eyes pleaded instead of obeying. "He's not safe here," he whispered. "None of us are." Noon came without sunlight. The sky was a dull silver, and the wind carried a smell of pine sap and something metallic, like fear made physical. Raymond was chopping kindling when a figure appeared through the haze of snow. A woman, mid-30s perhaps, bundled in a tan wool coat and scarf pulled high across her face. Her gait was hurried, uneven, the way people move when torn between hope and danger. She reached the porch, breathless, cheeks raw from the wind. "Mr. Cole?" she asked, voice trembling. "I'm Clara Reeves, a nurse from the mountain clinic." Her eyes darted toward the dog first. "I came because of Max. He saved one of our volunteers last winter. I thought..." Her words faltered as she stepped inside. The warmth hit her, but what she saw froze her all over again. Ryan lay by the fire, pale and still, his uniform half torn, badge faintly gleaming in the light. "That man?" She breathed, color draining from her face. "He was declared dead 3 days ago." The satchel in her hands slipped, spilling papers across the floor. Clinic records, medical transfers, signatures that didn't belong. Raymond picked one up, eyes scanning quickly. Identical names, different fates, falsified deaths. The same names from the footage he'd seen. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the lantern and the slow crackle of wood. Clara knelt to gather the papers, hands shaking. "I didn't believe it at first," she whispered. "But after last winter, the missing volunteers, the shipments, I knew something was wrong." She looked up at him, eyes wide with guilt. "The clinic. It isn't just a clinic anymore." Raymond's jaw tightened. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was one he didn't want to see. He turned toward Max, who had risen to his feet, body tense, eyes fixed on the ridge beyond the trees. The dog's growl began low, a warning drawn from instinct deeper than reason. Clara followed his gaze to the window. The snow outside shimmered oddly, as if catching a light that wasn't from the sun. Then she realized it wasn't a reflection. It was motionless. The faint orange pulse of headlights weaving through the fog. Approaching, slow and certain, Raymond reached for the rifle leaning by the door. Max pressed forward, fur bristling, a low rumble vibrating through the floorboards. Samuel's small hand clutched at the blanket, eyes wide but silent. Ryan turned his head weakly toward the sound, understanding too late what it meant. Someone had found them, and this time, the storm wasn't made of snow. Night gathered fast over the pines, swallowing what little light the world had left. The forest floor crackled beneath boots and paws, the snow crusted and uneven, hiding roots that snagged at every step. Raymond led the way, lantern in one hand, rifle slung low across his shoulder. Behind him, Ryan leaned against Clara for balance, his face ashen beneath the hood of her coat, breath visible in ragged bursts. Samuel kept close to Max, one small hand gripping the dog's harness as if it were the only solid thing left in a dissolving world. The storm had quieted, but what replaced it was heavier, the kind of silence that came only when the land was listening. Max moved with purpose, nose low, growls rumbling softly in his chest, like a compass that pointed toward danger instead of north. Somewhere between the trees, a raven called once, sharp and lonely, before the night swallowed even that sound. Raymond lifted the lantern higher, its weak orange circle trembling against the trunks of snow-darkened pines. He knew this stretch of forest, miles of old ranger territory, forgotten after the fires decades ago. What he didn't know was why his gut told him the truth they were chasing was buried here. They reached the clearing just past the ravine, a dip in the land choked with pine needles and the smell of frozen moss. The old ranger station waited there like a ghost, walls leaning, windows shattered, roof half collapsed under years of snow. A faded government emblem still clung to the front door, cracked and peeling like skin left too long in the sun. Samuel stared up at it, eyes wide. "Did people used to live here?" he asked. Raymond's voice was quiet. "Used to." Inside, the air was damp and stale, thick with mildew and dust. Their footsteps stirred faint echoes, dust motes floating like pale ghosts in the lantern's beam. Wooden chairs lay overturned, papers fused together with moisture, old maps curling at the edges. A typewriter rusted in the corner, a relic of voices long gone. Ryan sank onto a bench, coughing. Clara knelt beside him, wrapping his shoulder tighter in gauze, her hands trembling less from cold now and more from fear. "We can't stay long," she whispered. Raymond nodded, scanning the room. That was when Max stopped moving. His ears flicked forward, tail stiff. He let out a low growl, not of warning this time, but discovery. He pawed once at the floorboards near a rusted table, claws scraping against something hollow beneath. Raymond crouched, setting down the lantern, brushing away a layer of grime. A seam ran through the wood, faint but real. "Help me," he said. Ryan shifted forward despite Clara's protests, pressing his good hand against the edge. Together they pulled, the old hinges crying out before a square section of floor lifted free. Beneath it, darkness yawned open. A ladder descended into concrete shadow, the air below cold enough to sting their faces. The smell hit next, metallic, sterile, wrong. Raymond took the lantern, climbed down first, boots echoing on stone. When the light finally reached the floor, what it revealed wasn't decayed, it was used. Crates stacked in neat rows bore hospital emblems, some still stamped with dates only weeks old. IV bags hung limp from hooks, plastic tubing coiled like veins left behind. A generator sat in the corner, its low hum the only heartbeat in that underground tomb. Clara covered her mouth. This was a facility. Raymond didn't answer. He was staring at the labels on the crates. The same initials from the flash drive, the same pattern. This wasn't an accident. It was a continuation. Max patted ahead, nose twitching. He stopped before a steel freezer door half hidden behind a tarp. His growl deepened, not in fear but urgency, pawing at the handle until Raymond joined him. The metal was cold enough to burn skin, but Raymond didn't hesitate. He wedged the rifle's butt under the latch and pried hard. The lock gave way with a dull crack, and the door swung open. The air that poured out was a grave's exhale, frozen, chemical, faintly human. And then, movement. A shape slumped forward, tangled in IV lines, and before he could brace, Raymond caught the weight of a woman collapsing into his arms. She was light, frighteningly so. Her hair brittle and white at the ends, skin pale but alive beneath the frost. Her wrists bore red grooves, rope burns turned raw. Clara dropped to her knees beside them, pulling off her gloves to check a pulse. "She's alive," she gasped, barely. Raymond cradled the woman carefully, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. Her eyes fluttered open, irises clouded with fear and confusion. "Emma," she whispered hoarsely. "Emma Carver." The name struck something in him. Not memory, but recognition of fate. She gripped his sleeve with trembling fingers. He said he was the police, said his name was Jack Porter. The name hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Ryan's head jerked up, pain twisting across his face. "Jack," he rasped. His voice cracked, the word half disbelief, half fury. "Jack was my partner." The truth slid into place, sharp and merciless. The man who'd left him cuffed to die in a frozen ravine wasn't just a traitor. He was one of them. For a moment, no one spoke. Even Max had gone still, his eyes fixed on the ladder above, ears pricked. Then came the sound, faint at first, then unmistakable. Tires crunching snow. Not one vehicle, but several. Engines low and deliberate, circling. Clara's face went pale. Samuel clutched Max's fur, heart pounding against his ribs. Raymond met Ryan's eyes, soldier to soldier, both knowing there was no time left for disbelief. "Guard them," Raymond said quietly, voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. He handed the lantern to Clara, checked the rifle, and moved toward the ladder. Max whined softly, torn between obedience and instinct. Raymond gave a single nod, the kind that said, "Trust me." He climbed up into the dark, the cold meeting him halfway. Snowflakes drifted through the shattered windows of the ranger station, glowing faintly in the lantern light below. The engines stopped. Silence again, heavy and knowing. He took position by the doorway, breath fogging in a steady rhythm. Then, from the trees, the crack of a rifle. The first bullet shattered the lantern. Darkness claimed the room once more. The shot that shattered the lantern had also broken the world into halves, above and below, light and dark, right and wrong. Raymond hit the ground as glass rained down, his rifle clutched close, snow exploding around him with every bullet that struck the walls. The woods had come alive with fire and thunder, flashes of muzzle light blooming like cruel stars between the trees. He shouted once, a word lost to the wind, then returned fire, his voice and weapon both echoing the same defiance. Somewhere behind him, Ryan's hoarse command cut through the chaos, a voice made of pain and memory. "Left side!" The forest answered with violence. Bullets tore bark, sparks skittered across the snow, and smoke clung low to the ground like a living thing. Max darted through it, a streak of black and amber fur, moving faster than fear itself. Samuel crouched behind the overturned sled with Clara and Emma, the boy's wooden arm gripping Max's collar every time the dog returned to shield them. Clara's breath came in sharp bursts, her trembling hands pressing against Emma's shoulder to keep her low. "Don't move," she whispered, though her own body shook with each explosion of light. Ryan stumbled out from behind a pine, his side bandaged in haste, his uniform torn, eyes red from smoke. He moved on instinct now, not as an officer following orders, but as a man trying to reclaim his soul. Raymond covered him from the flank, each shot deliberate, each step forward a battle against age and ghosts that refused to die. They fought without words, two men bound by the same thing that had almost destroyed them: loyalty. Then, through the veil of smoke, a figure broke free, a gunman in a dark parka, ski mask soaked with frost, eyes wild. He raised his rifle toward the sled where Samuel hid. Max saw him first. A deep growl rumbled through the snow, and before the man could aim, the shepherd was already moving, a blur of muscle, fur, and instinct older than fear. He lunged, teeth finding flesh. The gun went off. The sound cracked the night open. Samuel screamed as Max's body twisted mid-air, the bullet striking his side. The dog landed hard, rolled, and still clamped his jaws around the attacker's wrist, dragging the man down even as blood darkened his fur. Raymond turned, saw the movement, and his heart clenched. Not from shock, but the kind of pain that comes when the world tries to take something you've already promised to protect. Ryan pivoted, raised his weapon, and fired once, clean, centered. The gunman dropped, snow swallowing him whole. But the silence that followed was worse than the gunfire. Because standing behind the fallen man, framed by the glow of the burning ranger station, was Jack Porter. He looked almost exactly as Ryan remembered. Tall, square-shouldered, dark hair slick with melting snow. The smirk that had once been confidence now twisted into cruelty. His rifle was steady, his eyes bright with something colder than hate. "You should have stayed buried, Ryan," he said, voice calm, almost regretful. Ryan didn't answer. His body trembled, half from exhaustion, half from disbelief that this ghost of betrayal could still cast a shadow so long. Behind him, Samuel was crying into Max's fur. Clara pressed both hands over the wound, whispering, "Stay with me, boy." Through tears that froze before they fell, the world seemed to hold its breath, every snowflake suspended, every sound waiting. Jack lifted his rifle. The gunshot came, but it wasn't his. Jack staggered backward, surprise flashing across his face before pain replaced it. The red stain bloomed across his chest like a slow, spreading dawn. He tried to speak, maybe a name, maybe an apology, but only a thin wisp of steam escaped his lips. He fell into the snow, eyes wide, staring at nothing. Behind him, Raymond stood steady, smoke curling from the rifle's muzzle, his expression carved from something harder than grief. For a long moment, no one moved. The forest had gone still again, as if even the wind was unwilling to disturb what had just happened. Then Samuel's sobs broke the silence. Small, uneven, human. He knelt beside Max, whose breaths came shallow and slow. The dog's eyes fluttered open at the sound of the boy's voice, a faint whine escaping his throat. Clara slid to the ground beside them, her gloves already stained red. "He's not gone," she whispered fiercely. "Not yet." She pressed her palms over the wound, feeling the faint, fragile rhythm beneath the fur. "Stay with me, Max. Stay." Raymond knelt too, his gloved hand resting lightly on the shepherd's head. He felt the tremor of life still there, faint but stubborn, the same way soldiers refuse to die until the fight is done. His throat tightened, but his voice remained steady. "He's held on through worse." Ryan, pale and shaking, lowered his weapon and looked toward the fallen body of his former partner. The expression on his face wasn't victory. It was mourning, for trust, for innocence, for the line between justice and revenge that had just been erased by the snow. He turned to Raymond. "You didn't have to." "Yes," Raymond said quietly, not looking away from Jack. "I did." The words carried no pride, only inevitability. The night was heavy again, but this time it wasn't silence that filled it. It was relief. The kind that comes only after the storm has spent itself and the damage has been done. Above them, the clouds began to pulse with a distant hum. At first it seemed like the wind was changing direction, but then the sound grew steadier, rhythmic, mechanical. Ryan's head snapped up. "Do you hear that?" Raymond did. So did Samuel. It was faint but unmistakable, the chopping of blades slicing through the mountain air. Helicopters. A beam of white light swept across the trees, painting stripes through the smoke. Clara shielded her eyes as the voice from above crackled through a loudspeaker. Commands, clipped and urgent. The insignia on the craft glinted briefly in the moonlight. FBI. Ryan let out a long, shaking breath. "It's over." But Raymond only stared upward, snow falling on his shoulders, the rifle still warm in his hands. In the searchlight's glow, his face looked older, carved by every loss, every promise broken and kept. "No," he said softly, almost to himself. "It's just beginning." The rotors thundered closer, wind whipping the snow into ghosts. Between the flashes of light, Max blinked once, then twice, his paw twitching as Samuel held him tighter. "He's still fighting," the boy whispered. And Raymond, watching the dawn begin to pale behind the ridge, finally believed it. The storm had left its scars across the valley, burned trees, bullet holes in bark, footprints half swallowed by snow. But even scars under sunlight can learn how to heal. Weeks slipped by like quiet prayers, and one morning the frost finally gave up its hold. Rivers that had been silent began to murmur again. The roofs of Snow Pine Valley's cabins shimmered under a gentler light, and the wind no longer carried the cry of battle, only the sigh of melting snow. At the foot of the hill, a new sign caught that morning light. Its edges still smelled of fresh-cut wood, the letters carved deep and steady. the Coal Rescue Center for those who never gave up. Beneath it, two figures moved in the field, a boy and his dog, framed by thawing grass and the last patches of snow. Samuel ran awkwardly but determinedly, the new prosthetic gleaming with metal joints crafted by the town's engineers. He laughed as Max darted ahead of him, tail cutting through the air like a flag of victory. The German shepherd's coat bore a patch of shaved fur where the bullet had gone in, a thin white scar tracing his ribs like a signature left by survival itself. Raymond stood by the fence, coffee in hand, the steam curling like memory in the chill. His body still carried the aches of winter, but his eyes were calm now. The kind of calm that comes not from forgetting pain, but from having faced it and lived. Beside him, Clara walked up carrying a clipboard and two mugs. Her cheeks were pink from the morning wind, her hair tied back beneath a wool cap. "He's faster every day," she said, watching Samuel stumble and rise again. "He doesn't let it stop him." Raymond smiled faintly. "Neither does Max." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time since the night in the ravine, the lines of fatigue on her face softened into something like peace. Behind them, the cabin had changed too. Where the bullet holes once marked the siding, fresh boards gleamed in the sun. Where blood had once stained the snow, the first shoots of spring grass had begun to grow. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Inside, the old radio still sat on the shelf, now replaced with new parts. It crackled occasionally with calls from local rescue teams, young voices learning to carry courage across static. Clara managed the medical wing they'd built in the back room, treating frostbite, sprains, and sometimes just loneliness. There were volunteers, too. Mountain rangers, nurses, even old miners who said they wanted to fix something for once. Each one had a story, and somehow, all of them had found their way here, to this place that had been born from pain and remade into purpose. Ryan arrived often, though never in uniform. The badge was gone from his chest, but his posture still carried the weight of what he'd been. His limp was fading, replaced by a quiet steadiness. He'd helped train new recruits for the rescue unit, teaching them not how to shoot or fight, but how to listen. To the silence of the woods, to the rhythm of breathing under snow, to the things that most people don't stop long enough to hear. When he saw Max, he always crouched down, scratching gently behind the shepherd's ear. "Guess we both got another chance," he'd say, and Max, as if understanding, would nudge his hand with quiet gratitude. Sometimes, after the day's work was done and the valley dimmed into evening, Raymond would sit on the porch with a blanket over his knees and let the world go still again. The coffee would cool, the wind would shift, and he'd close his eyes for just a moment. In those moments, he swore he could hear his wife's voice, soft, amused, familiar, carried by the air that moved through the pines. "You did it," she'd whisper. "You brought them home." He never answered aloud. He didn't need to. The warmth in his chest said enough. Samuel would come running up after sunset, cheeks flushed, hair wild, Max at his heels. The boy always carried something in his pocket. A stone, a gear, a piece of wood he'd carved into a small figure. He'd press it into Raymond's palm like an offering, then curl up beside Max, head resting on the dog's back. The shepherd would glance up at Raymond, as if asking permission, then lay still, content, the firelight painting his fur in shades of gold and rust. That night, the wind changed again, carrying with it the scent of thawing soil and pine resin, the kind of air that makes people believe in beginnings. Inside the cabin, the fire cracked softly, gentle as a heartbeat. Raymond reached down, his hand resting on Max's broad head. The shepherd's eyes half closed, breathing deep, steady, alive. "Good boy," Raymond whispered, voice thick with something between gratitude and prayer. "You brought back the warmth." Outside, the valley glowed with a light that wasn't just from the fire, but from something larger, something reborn. The mountains watched in silence as the stars came out, one by one, reflected in the silver threads of melting streams. The same silence that once meant fear now spoke only of peace. The camera panned upward, past the cabin's soft lantern glow, past the ridge that had seen so much darkness, to the endless, quiet sky of Snowpine. And in that silence, you could almost hear it. Not the sound of loss, but of everything that had endured. In a valley once buried by storms, a veteran, a boy, and a loyal dog found something greater than survival. They found their way back to the light. Some stories don't end when the mission does. They simply learn how to breathe again. In the laughter of a child, in a scar that no longer hurts, in a heart that still remembers what loyalty means. Out there, someone is still standing guard in the quiet. Not for glory, not for praise, but because kindness has its own kind of courage. And maybe that's what the world needs most. Not heroes in the spotlight, but souls who choose to stay when the cold closes in. If you've ever believed that love can outlast fear, that loyalty still matters, then these stories are for you. Stay with us, and let the next light find you too. Subscribe to Healing with Max, where every act of courage becomes a whisper of hope.